Hi, Dennis Bills here from life-skills.com.au. Now for the second part of your accommodation options, and today we're going to start with connecting utilities like your electricity, your gas, your phone and your internet. You should always make sure you compare the prices of multiple providers. It's going to take you a bit of time to do this, but you should be able to log into a variety of different companies' websites, and they will advertise their rates, particularly for electricity and gas. They will advertise their rates, and then there are even some companies like finder.com.au and maybe CanStar Blue that will actually compare rates for you. But you should always compare prices before you sign up for anything. And the internet is as good a place to start, particularly for electricity and gas. And there's also an option for you to check whether the house you're about to move in to has a landline connection for home phone or NBN. I'll drop the links to those sites underneath this video. So depending on where you live, there's going to be a range of providers available to you. Just make sure that you get your connections organised well before you move in, and not after, because then you'll be in a world of pain because you won't have anything. There's also a variety of different agencies that will organise all of your utilities in advance, but at a cost. My take on it is that it's cheaper to do it yourself. It's just a little bit of homework. So if you're moving from out of one house and into another, you can usually inform your utilities provider that you want your account moved to another address. And that's because most phone, gas and power companies now have online forms that allow you to enter in your start date at the new address as well as your last date at your current address. So let's talk about electricity. You'll need to have both the electricity and gas connected in at least one of the co-tenants' names. So you have to decide who's going to be putting their hand up to have the power providers, gas providers, the bills will go to them and it'll be in their names, which means that they will be responsible if something it goes wrong or if a bill isn't paid. You should also make contact with your preferred provider at least 2 weeks before you move in, or sooner if possible. With gas, it makes sense for you to check in advance the type of heating and cooling available at your new address, because you really want to know the cheapest way to warm and cool your new home. And at this stage, gas is still probably the least expensive method of heating. That is, unless your property has a sufficient solar system along with electric heating and cooling. But other than that, if your house doesn't have solar panels and some sort of solar system, then you're probably going to be better to go with gas for your heating and cooking. If your rental property happens to be somewhere off the beaten track though, you might need to look at bottled gas for your hot water and heating. Otherwise you might need to purchase some sort of electric heater, but be aware that there's also a quarterly fee associated with renting gas bottles. And that being said, electric heaters are possibly one of the more expensive ways of heating a home. With your phone, it's up to you whether you connect a landline to your home or not, but if each tenant already has a decent mobile phone along with a reasonable plan, along with good reception, there's always just a chance that you won't need a landline at all. But if you want cheaper, more reliable internet, if such a thing is possible in this country, for things like downloading, gaming and streaming, you're probably going to need a landline. You should also be aware that there are several 500 gig per month mobile home broadband plans available as well nowadays, which means that it's possible that you won't need a landline, only a decent mobile home broadband modem that'll pick up a signal. But that can be limiting if you've got 3 or 4 people that are using internet constantly, like YouTube, gaming, downloading, whatever, streaming, then you're probably going to chew up 500 gig in less than the 28 days of most plans. So it just depends on what your usage is going to be. And there are some websites where you can actually go in and test what your usage has been, or if you're on a plan at the moment, you can go into your provider and they can usually provide you with the information on how much internet you've been using over the last few months. If your home does have an existing landline, there's a vast array of providers who can provide reasonably inexpensive internet. I'm thinking around $65 for unlimited, with maybe some sort of maybe 25 to 50 megabits per second download speed. Shop around, it's your best bet. To connect to an existing phone line for your rented property, you'll be required to pay a connection fee irrespective of the provider. If you need to move any of the connection points inside the home that you've rented or create new ones, you should first consult with your landlord, because they need to approve, though you're likely to be responsible for the costs associated with these changes. But once the landline is connected, you'll be free to choose your fixed line service provider of choice. In regard to maintaining and repairing a property that you are renting, one common expectation under tenancy law is that the property you are about to move into has been deemed to be fit to live in. And it should be that way from the very beginning of the tenancy. Once you've moved in though, it then becomes your responsibility to keep the property in a similar state to the way you found it. What that basically means is that you're not permitted to make any modifications to your premises without your landlord's permission, not even something as small as putting up a picture hook, apparently. Because even though most repairs remain the responsibility of your landlord, if you and your housemates and associates are actually the cause of any damages, you'll also be responsible for the repairs. And if you're unable to pay for the damage you caused, then your landlord might request that the amount be taken from your bond, which would then need to be topped up. If the cost of the repairs ends up being greater than the bond amount paid, you'll still be responsible for paying the remainder. Emergency repairs are also the responsibility of the landlord or their agent, and should be carried out as soon as possible after a problem has been reported. So if you do have a problem with the gas or the power, blown fuses, whatever, this responsibility lies with your landlord, and they should be able to send someone around to repair these things as soon as possible. Just be aware that under emergency conditions, a landlord or agent may also have the capacity to enter your property without your permission. So just make sure you've got all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. If you're going to put your hand up for emergency conditions, that your landlord may actually be able to come into your property. If something in the house needs immediate repairs, you should report the issue to your agent straight away. But if your landlord or agent are not available to organise the repairs, then depending on the circumstances, you as the tenant are entitled to contact a suitably qualified tradesperson to complete the repairs, but only up to a specified value, which varies from state to state. So you need to check this out too. But if you do have to go down that path, just make sure that you keep the receipts for any of the work performed. In most cases, your landlord will then have to refund you the total amount you paid for the emergency repairs, and they'll also have to refund you within about 14 days. Now, the rates in a rented house or flat situation are usually the responsibility of the landlord. That's the government rates associated with your rental property. In most cases, the landlord will also pay your water rates or part thereof, unless your rental agreement specifies otherwise, though nowadays it's usual for the tenants, the renters, to pay for any excess water rates. So that's the amounts of water you use above the amounts that are allowable on a landlord's normal rates notice, without extra charges. When it comes to insuring the property or the contents, renters are not responsible for insuring the property, only their own assets and the things that belong to them. If your collective assets of all the people in the house add up to more than a few $1,000s, then my advice would be to make sure that they're insured, because while the value of each individual tenant's possessions might appear insignificant at first, you'll be surprised by what they add up to when you start to put them all together and look at their replacement value. That's why you should look into getting a basic contents insurance cover for your collective possessions. So for example, my contents insurance for my property costs me about $250, $260 a year, and that's insured for I think about $80,000 or $90,000, which is a lot of possessions. But you know, so you divide that insurance up between 3 or 4 housemates, it's not so bad. And it's, if you've got expensive things like technology, musical equipments, you know, private possessions that are worth money, worth value to you, that have value to you, then your best bet is to look at some contents insurance. Being insured for lost or damaged items is also a far less expensive option than having to purchase them all over again. So remember to price your belongings based on their replacement value. You should also keep copies, physical and or digital, of all your insurance matters, and file them under the heading of house contents insurance in either your physical file or your digital file that you keep on one of your devices. And that's what I went into earlier on in an earlier vlog. We talked about just how to manage some of these filing systems so that you have quick access to your information. But anyway, given that your contents insurance is a collective policy, you should also make sure that you itemise the more expensive items owned by each individual, as well as make note of their relative value. It would also pay for you to work out a percentage ownership of each item that the group owns collectively. I get it that all this probably sounds like a fairly labour-intensive task, but in reality, you should be able to knock over the entire job in under a couple of hours. Be aware that the price of contents insurance can also vary, usually dependent on your postcode, and could be related to the amount of insurance claims per postcode, break-ins, not having proper security systems in place. So your insurance, contents insurance, might also be more expensive if your home doesn't have secure locks or a home security system. So you could always ask your landlord to upgrade the locks on the gates and the doors and the windows, as well as provide some sort of alarm system, preferably a back to base system. That means that if someone tries to break into your property, an alarm goes off with a security company and they inform you. Once again, it's one of those added costs that could seem like it's a bit over the top, but if you have got a lot of possessions and you do suffer a break-in or a fire or whatever, these things all more than pay for themselves. So if you ever do need to make an insurance claim, you should contact your insurance company as soon as possible after the event. Nowadays though, most insurance companies have standard online claims procedures, so you can actually initiate a claim almost immediately after it's happened. If the claim is the result of either theft or malicious, which is deliberate, not accidental damage, then you should also contact the police. It would also be helpful if you could provide both your insurer and the police with a list of your missing or damaged belongings. That's why I so highly recommend that you take out contents insurance for all your collective possessions, and also take photos or video of all your belongings, but in their usual positions around the house. And a good time to do that is about 2 or 3 weeks after you've moved in, or earlier if possible. It's would pay to have your contents in place right from contents insurance in place right from the start, but it might take a while for you to unpack everything and have it in the regular positions around the house. Then video it. Then send a copy to your insurer and you keep a copy. You should also file these photos and videos under your file, a physical file or your digital file called House Contents Insurance. Should you ever need to make a claim, your saved photos and videos are going to be invaluable. Just to be sure, you should also store these photos and videos in a few different places, like on a hard drive, on your device, and in the cloud, but preferably in all of these places at once. And Microsoft and Google and the like have some reasonably good cloud storage with limitations, but reasonably good that you could fit these things in that will be updated if you change them on your hard drive, or if you change them on your device, they'll change in the cloud as well. Just something to think about. If your claim is the result of the property itself being damaged, then you should also contact your agent almost as soon as you can. Remember though that it's not your responsibility to insure the house or the apartment itself, just your contents. Your landlord should also have their own insurance coverage for the property and the dwelling. Now, we also need to talk about some other accommodation options. Other than just renting a house or an apartment, there are other things that you can do and you might have to do initially to get yourself started. For example, if you're heading away from home for work or study, at first you might need to be reasonably flexible in regard to your initial living arrangements. You might also be required to accept perhaps less than perfect situation, at least until you've settled in or gotten a feel for your new environment. So if you choose to take up a vacant room in a group rental arrangement with several people that you don't know, make sure that you give yourself a bit of time to settle in. Hopefully though, you would have already spoken to your prospective housemates beforehand about their expectations as well as your own. So while I think it's fair for you to expect a certain standard of behaviour and living when you first move in, just make sure that you're prepared for things to be a little bit different to maybe to what you're used to. So what I'm more or less saying is at least give yourself and your new housemates a chance to settle yourselves into your new arrangement and get used to each other. What most people find is that their circumstances usually improve quite quickly once they've had a bit of time to catch their breath and settle in and get a new routine established. But then I suppose if you've given yourself time and you still don't seem to fit into your new environment, then perhaps you should only think of that arrangement as a starting point and maybe start looking for something else and perhaps something better. Just don't throw in the towel because a couple of early setbacks in your great adventure. Everything new or different is going to challenge you in some way, and some people don't cope with new environments or change very well. And if you're one of these people, you need to try and analyse your own situation, make sure you're not overreacting if things aren't going your way. If you're studying, you might also find yourself living on campus in the accommodation section of a tertiary institution, probably in a single room with either an ensuite or a shared bathroom arrangement. In these situations, it's also common for you to be sharing kitchen, dining and lounge facilities. So that really means in your bedroom, you're only going to need a bed and a desk. And in a lot of university accommodation situations, bedrooms don't have much more room in them for anything else than a bed and a desk. Just be aware that there's usually an expectation for you to help out with the cleaning and general upkeep of the common areas of your facility, as well as your own room, of course. At the start, all you'll really need in regard to cooking is to know how to prepare a few basic meals, and I've actually thrown a few of those in my upcoming book, Lessons in Life, and they are for people who are non-cooks like I was when I left home, and they at least give you a leg up on how to get started. I think if you knew how to cook 7 or 8 different meals, that should be enough, particularly if you're sharing the cooking arrangements with other people who cook another variety of meals. So that's something to think about. In time though, you might find yourself as part of a shared cooking rotation between some of the new people that you've met on campus. Living on campus is also a great way to meet new people. It's almost difficult to be alone if you're living on campus. There's so many people around. The only problem is that vacancies are often limited, so my advice would be to contact your preferred institution as soon as possible after you've been accepted into your course, if that's what you want to do. Now, in regard to changing your address, when you move homes, there are a range of people, companies and government agencies that will need to know your new address, but given that it's possible for most of your correspondence, even with organisations like banks, social services and the government, to take place online, there's probably no need for you to redirect your physical mail through Australia Post, which is what I used to recommend. I don't receive any mail at all that I know of. There might be a couple that slip through, but I don't even check my mailbox most of the time nowadays. and given that Uber Eats are delivered to the front door and parcels are as well, the mailbox has almost become a thing of the past. So if you haven't rigged your mail system so that you stop receiving letters by post anyway, then maybe now's the time to take a good look at that. But if you still do receive your mail in the post, then it's probably time that you went paperless anyway and did the right thing by the planet. Just remember to change the address of the most important organisations first, like your driver's licence, your Medicare card, MyGov account, and your bank statements, and your ambulance, things like that. Most organisations and institutions nowadays allow for addresses to be changed online, so you should be able to do that through whatever agency's website. But here are some of the individuals, organisations and institutions that you might want to inform about your change of address. So there's your family and friends, of course, and an employer, the taxation office, your super fund if you've got one, your bank and credit card providers, MyGov, which is Medicare and health insurance and tax anyway, your licence, your car rego, your roadside assistance if you've got that, and even your registration with the Australian Electoral Commission. And then there's your utilities, power, water, gas, whatever. And you might want to also let your previous landlord know where you are if you're still on speaking terms, as well as your neighbours, your previous neighbours. When it comes to moving in and out of your new and old properties, the way you transport your belongings to your new place is entirely up to you, but since a removalist might be outside of your budget, a few trips in either your own car or someone else's might be enough to get the job done. If you've got more than a few bootloads and you know someone with a car that has a tow ball, then maybe you could hire an enclosed trailer, which really does change the game because you're not going to have stuff blowing out of an open trailer or a ute, for example. Or maybe you might be able to borrow a friend's trailer. The key to any trailer is to tie things down with more rope than you might think you need. Just tie everything down over and over again, almost a spider's web across the top. Someone with an enclosed ute would be pretty handy, but especially if you've got a couple of friends who are willing to give you a hand with your gear, because some items of furniture like a bed and some TVs and the like and fridges, washing machines are just far too heavy and awkward for one person. Just make sure that you tie everything down, ensure that you pack up your breakables carefully and label the boxes that contain the fragile items. To keep things protected, you can use scrunched up newspaper, you can use spare towels, tea towels, or even some of your items of clothing. They make for pretty good protection for some of the more sensitive bits and pieces that you own. But be warned that your first home is usually a catalyst for you to gradually accumulate even more possessions, which means that your next move is bound to be even more challenging than your first. For some young people though, moving from one place to another can be a gradual process, especially when they first leave home, whereby in the initial stages they only take the absolute essentials with them, which I've got a list of in my upcoming book, Lessons in Life. And then you gradually start to add more things as time goes on. If you're really lucky, you'll only have to move a few kilometres up the road from your parents' place or something like that. Though for a lot of young people from rural areas or from the more peripheral outer suburbs, that's often not the case. So if you do have a choice to leave some things behind, perhaps at your parents' place or at a friend's house or even out in the back shed, my advice would be to start off by taking just the things you need in the immediate future. And the things you leave behind, make sure you secure them in plastic containers so to keep out rats and mice, in back sheds, and that they're not going to get wet if there's a flood or whatever. But irrespective of how it happens, whether your move has military style precision or it's more of a bits and pieces affair with very little planning, you've got to still try and see the fun side of it. I think that's the key. I mean, surely just the thought of moving to a new home or a new job or a new start is a really exciting proposition. But don't forget to get your utility connections organised before you move in so that you already have power and hot water when you arrive. And don't forget to pick up the keys to your new property. And finally, if and when you and your housemates finally decide that the time is right to move out of the house you're renting, but preferably when your lease is up and not before, make sure that you inform your landlord or agent at least a month in advance, but also inform them in writing, and an email would be sufficient. But also ask the agent to acknowledge that they have received the email. You should also leave the premises in a similar state to the way you found it, and give the place a complete and thorough clean, including those hard to get places. And my new book, upcoming book, Lessons in Life, actually has a cleaning table somewhere in the first 50 or so pages. Tenancy agreements also make allowances for the premises that you're leaving to show signs of reasonable use and some general wear and tear from your tenancy. So it doesn't have to be pristine. You're allowed to have lived in it. And once you've vacated the premises, your real estate agent will then carry out one final inspection and then present the landlord with a final condition report. And this is when your original condition report, along with the photos and videos that you shot on arrival, could come in handy, just in case the landlord or your agent tries to blame you for any of the pre-existing conditions of the property. But if there are any repairs required where either you or your housemates have been responsible for the damage, the cost of the repairs can be deducted from your bond, with you and your housemates being liable for any extra costs. Before you leave, make sure you lock all the doors, all the windows, turn off the hot water service and all the taps, along with all the lights and the power points, but leave the power on. You should also remember to contact your power supplier, your phone company and gas supplier to arrange for the services to be disconnected. And lastly, make sure you hand over all copies of your keys to your landlord or agent. And if you have any issues regarding your bond, you should contact your state's Office of Fair Trading or Department of Consumer Affairs, and I've left a link underneath this video for that. So there it is, a lot of information in regard to just accommodation in general, and then you get into all the finite bits and pieces, and it's almost overwhelming, but it's also just one thing at a time. And if you don't have the knowledge of how the entire system works, then at least you've got something like this video as a reference point so that you can pick up on any of those things that you may have missed out on. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.